All right, welcome everybody to another expert interview. And today is going to be a show like no other show. We have some serious experts on from our industry today. We're going to have a real conversation all the way to the top of the National Association of Home Builders. And this conversation is going to be defined by the knowledge that not only that these guests impart to you, but the knowledge that you bring to this show. We are looking for this to be interactive. We're looking to take conversation to the next level. We want your questions. So with that said, we have quite a few hundred people have signed up for today's show. Please put a Q next to your question. That way I can separate questions from the just conversation that normally happens on this show. So we are looking forward to the show today, and we're looking forward to all these guests. At Dave Cooper Live, we are bringing you the people and the processes that are building it better. Our guests and topics include experts in building systems to building science, building codes, and the tech used to build it better. We are always seeking out the best and the brightest in construction and discovering all the ways that innovative buildings come to life. And today is no different. It is time that we are no longer in last place as an industry when it comes to innovation and technology. We should be in first place. We should be the Tesla of the world, home building and construction. All right, so what are we talking about today? We're going to be defining construction efficiencies on today's show. Now, what does that mean? That means we're going to ask each guest questions around this topic. This is only one of the topic around this topic, and they're each going to have 1 to 2 minutes to answer, and then we're going to have a conversation on it. Then we're going to move to the value of offsite construction. Again, we're going to have a specific question. The guests are going to have their 1 or 2 minutes to answer, and then we'll have a conversation. And then on to driving efficiency in offsite construction and construction technology. This is going to be a hot conversation right here. The conversation is going to just get bigger and better as we go through. And then last but not least, further adoption of modern methods of construction. Does it fit in? What does the future look like? Is this opinions? Is it facts? Is there data out there? I think you'll be surprised that some of our guests have plenty of data on these things. Now, moving forward, we have a special guest on the show today. Brittany Campbell Turner will be joining us, CEO and founder of Constructor. Now, what is so great about Brittany is she's not in our little circle of let's talk to each other and just share our own comments and thoughts. Brittany is out there doing her own thing in construction management and technology. She has her own podcast. She's making a difference. I came across Brittany through Tim Sims, who a lot of you I know watching know Tim Sims from John Burns Real Estate. So with that said, I would like to bring Brittany into the conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be joining with you here today. Dave, thank you so much
I
for
love it.
having me.
Brittany, I think this is just awesome. I think that overall, having your opinion, your insight coming from a technology background, coming from a project management background, you've worked with some large builders out in the world. You're doing your own podcast, you're interviewing, you're doing all the things that we need to do to drive this industry forward. So your opinion, your contribution to this is just, I'm so grateful for it. And I can't thank Tim enough for making the introduction to us.
Thank you, Tim.
Right?
Want to put that thank you out there for him too. Yeah, I appreciate
So,
it. Excited
I,
to jump into this conversation.
Brittany, why don't you take, because you have not been on our show yet, why don't you take 30 seconds and just give everybody your quick elevator pitch, who you are, where you come from, and then we'll hop into it.
Absolutely. Brittany Campbell Turner, CEO and founder of Constructor. I have been in the industry for 12 plus years now, primarily working with public, private, and the owner's representation uh, role, all the ways from project controls to project management. And now I'm leading a team of project managers where I work my full time day job, American Family Insurance. My focus has been in workplace, but to Dave's point, I have actually been having conversations around innovation, around technology, around how to establish a strong governance and strategy for construction projects for the past 7 years since I started my podcast. I actually started interviewing on Skype. Remember when that was like the primary place to actually do recordings? That's when I started, when maybe there were 3 podcasts out there. I'm super excited to see that so many people are pushing this conversation, Dave very much included. And I'm happy to just continue this conversation around modern methods of construction.
Modern methods of construction. This is going to be a fun show, but here's the deal. We have some rules on the show with the guest, Brittany, as you know, and Brittany's going to help me enforce the rules. They are very simple. We're going to ask a question. Each guest is going to have a minute, 2 minutes max to answer that question. Then we'll have a roundtable discussion on that question for a couple minutes. We have 5 total questions to get through today, so it's going to be really important for time management because we got some big personalities on here today, so we're going to control them. So why don't we start with the first big personality? There's no mention of this person that you guys don't already know. From Integra, we have Jerry McCaughey. Let's bring Jerry McCaughey onto the show. Hey, Jerry, how are you today, my friend?
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Brittany.
Oh,
I'm very well.
You're all warmed up from Friday, Jerry. So I mean, you should be ready to go.
Yeah, no, the warm up. The shock you gave me on Friday, I'm still not quite over yet. But yeah, I'm raring to go now. But I take it that when you said the time management, that's primarily aimed at me. So I'll do my best to keep it short and succinct as much as I can.
Don't worry. I have a 30-second warning clock that will pop up when it's ticking, so you never have to worry about me yelling at you. It'll just pop up for you. All right. All right, Jerry, thank you for joining us today. Okay, our next guest, all the way from France, the one, the only, the guru in offsite modular construction, mostly self-proclaimed, as I like to say. We got good old Henry Mickelberg joining us today. So looking forward to having Henry on the stream. What's happening, Mr. Henry? Look, I got to take my banner down. You're taking up my full screen. What's up, Henry?
Hi, Dave. Hi, guys. Hi, Brittany. Yeah, this should be good. I'm quite excited about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need to introduce myself too much, but I'm thinking maybe the amount of ribbing I've got about guru wasn't the best title I could have chosen. So just be kind.
Hey, listen, we are kind. You are a guru in my mind. You always have something intelligent to say. And Henry, quite honestly, the best thing about it with you is, you kind of just put it out there for what it is, and we need more of that in the industry. Not so much fluff. We need real answers. We need real comments, whether it hurts, tickles, or makes us cry. It's just the way it goes, right?
That's the kindest way of saying I'm quite rude, Dave, that I've ever heard. Thanks very much.
Hey, I tried to soften the blow. What can I do? All right. Moving on. So this guest has been on our show once a month. We have been very privileged to have Greg Ugaldi joining us. He is the immediate past chair of the National Association of Home Builders. He is still very active in that role this year as well. He's taken a liking to being on this show and really talking about how do we further construction, offsite construction, modern methods of construction. How do we be better? How do we be number one in this industry? So without further ado, let me bring in Mr. Greg Ugaldi. Hey, Greg, how are you today?
Good. It's good to be back, Dave.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It really is. So if this isn't an award-winning lineup of people right here, I don't know what is. I think this is going to be a super fun conversation. I already see the comments box lighting up. Jennifer is in the background working hard to make sure that we don't miss any comments or questions. But again, if you are just joining us, you need to put a Q if you want us to ask your question on the show. Put a Q in front of the question. Everybody, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And I'm not going to ask everybody why we're live on Twitch other than Greg Ugaldi's on Twitch. That's important. But the young people are on Twitch. That's where they do their virtual gaming. And guess what? The young people are not coming to us. So we decided at Dave Cooper Live, we're going to go to them. And they're starting to watch. They're starting to comment. Let's bring them into our industry, because if they see how cool our industry is, they'll actually want to be part of it. And I truly believe that. So with no further ado, make sure you go and like and share this post right now, and make sure that you subscribe and like and follow Brittany, Jerry, Greg, and Henry right now. If you don't, you're wrong. It's just the way it goes. Guys, can you tell I'm having a lot of fun? Here we go. This is good. All right. We're going to go round robin. I'm just going to try and do this as easy as I can. Brittany, I'm going to ask you the first question. All right. The first question is, how do we define the cost of offsite construction? You have a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Go ahead.
How do we define costs of off-site construction? We only have 2 minutes. I'm going to start off saying that there's so many perceptions of what off-site is in the first place that you really have to get your head wrapped around what it means to do work off-site. And there's a perspective of doing it for off-site to simply do a more modern method and innovate and all of that. But there's truly a savings, less of a cost to off-site construction if you plan correctly in the beginning. So I would say that to me is really evaluating what that cost is. You have to identify not just materials, not just labor, but the things that you're eliminating as far as waste. So that whole piece is that comprehensive look at cost.
Love it. Thank you. All right, great. Now, next, let's go. Jerry McCahey, you're next in line. How do we define the cost of offsite construction? And something tells me you have a good answer on this too.
Well, I don't think the issue is how we define it. The problem with this is how the building industry itself defines it, because of their lack of understanding of what offsite construction truly is. And this goes back to this whole point that I say that offsite construction is not so much a physical product as it is a process. And really what we say is we're 80% of what we do in our business is about process improvement, and 20% is about a hard physical product that you actually see ending up on the site. But the value that's brought to the customer is actually achieved through that 80% that most people can't physically see or touch or actually even begin to understand. Because you have to, all of us in the industry, I think it's like that expression that said, if you're an alcoholic, the first thing you have to do is admit you have a problem. And I think that's part of the issue here in the construction industry. We've got to admit that there are, not say a problem, but we've got to admit that there are better ways to do things. I mean, dropping lumber onto a building site, if you're talking about single family residential and trying to construct somebody's home, basically abdicating all connection with, or removing all connection with modern methods, modern technology, which you would never do for any other product. I mean, starting out with that seems crazy, because the reason why people use all of those other pieces of technology is because they know that they can reduce cost and they can improve the quality of the product, and in consequently, as Brittany said, reduce waste, improve safety. There's a whole load of other factors again. So when you start talking define cost, the first thing we have to do as an industry is get the builder to understand it's not just about the physical product that arrives in the building site. It's about the total process that happens from the minute you decide you're going to go on site, or even actually before that, to the point in time where that building is actually completed. So it's a much broader discussion than just simply, there's the physical product. How much does that compare against the physical alternative?
Love it. Perfect. Thank you. All right, moving around the horn, Greg Ugaldi. You've been a part of this show quite a bit, and we've had these conversations quite a bit. I think this is a great question for you as well. How do we define the cost of offsite construction, Mr. Ugaldi?
So it's interesting. You're going to hear different perspectives today, which is exactly what we need to do, is work through this. As Jerry and Henry are going to point out, and Brittany started with, that it's not just the physical cost. But let me start with this. So when a builder looks at a job, we basically have a couple components that we have to cover in the sales price when we bring something to market. So what we do first is you look at land and getting the site prep ready, and then we build a house on it. So what we call a house book becomes critically important to both of these exercises. What it means, what the cost is of off-site construction versus the conventional, traditional way that we've built, stick built term. So what happens is that at the end of the day, you have the money that comes in for the sale, and then you have all the costs. And when you split them up, the majority are going in your house book, go to what we've determined the costs are. When you bring in a product, we've done it with panelization. We haven't gone modular yet, which is something that I really think is going to be the next wave, and that's what we're going to get into on this show. But I think that it becomes critically important that you realize that all of that has to be covered. Now, you could start weighing cost benefits and analysis, where we gain, where we lose, but materials, labor, and all of that get caught up in what we call the house book.
Yeah. Awesome. Perfect. All right, Mr. Mickelberg, Henry Mickelberg, all the way from France. So, Henry, let's hear your answer. How do we define the cost of offsite construction?
Well, to varying degrees of difficulty, really. Depends what the product is. Some are quite easy to define. If it's a hotel, then if you've got your act together, then you can easily determine that time and quality will give you a to-market realization that affects the bottom line, and that's quite simple. I suppose with methodology and with proof, there's no point in doing it differently unless it's better. And the approach that I take and we take is you take the key drivers and the key metrics for each particular client, and then you assign value to them. And from that, you then come out with an equation of what is beneficial and what's not. And if that's cost, that's cost. But you do it system agnostically and you do it impartially, and you prove the value proposition. And if you prove the value proposition,
right,
it's very hard for anyone to decide not to do it.
Perfect. All right, let's have the conversation. This is where the roundtable gets a little bit fun. Who would like to go ahead and talk first as far as when
let me just tie it in, Dave, because I think we're all saying a lot of what needs to be recognized. At the end of the day, it doesn't really so much matter what the semantics are and what you call it. It's if you have a checkbook that you've used to build and get a house ready for sale, those are the costs that you have to cover, right? So if you picture every expenditure that goes out, you have some land, you have land prep, you have your utilities. But if you look at materials, labor, and those types of things, so if we're covering some of that with the offsite components that are brought in, that's great. Just remember, at the end of the day, you still have to cover all the costs, regardless of where it's built.
Perfect. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I take the perspective of an owner, right? I've been an owner's rep my career, and you know, I think Jerry mentioned the perspective of the builder and thinking about how to really transition mindset in order to think about the components. What components do you actually need to actually build offsite? It starts way earlier on in that journey, to Greg's point, right? You have a checkbook, you have a budget prepared. You need to think about strategy. You need to think about what you want to achieve. What's that timing that you want to build within? What's your overall ROI, right? What's the nature of your business, right? How do you sell? What's your end customer view? And how do you make sure that from A to Z and beyond, you're coming at the project with a comprehensive look?
Yeah, very much so. But
that's just about defining the key drivers for the client. So they could be a mixture of, it could be a purely profit-based return, it could be equality, it could be social value, you know, and then you just line up all these various criteria, and then you just go, okay, well, this is this and this, and we just assign it, and then you decide, well, hang on, in the round, this is the right solution or this isn't. I mean, one example that perhaps is not obvious is we've got one client who we're going through their their snag list, their punch list, effectively, and there are 20,434 items on that list.
Mm-hmm.
So a cursory glance going through them made me realise that over 50% of them are related to bathrooms and kitchens and plumbing problems. So if you can all of a sudden replace just those components with an offsite manufactured system, you're instantaneously solving a huge problem for that client.
Sure.
But I'd still go back to. I still want to go back and say I still have this issue where people, when they look at offsite construction, are still thinking of a physical product on the site. But I take what Henry said is absolutely true, and I think Andy Mest from Greystar would 100% back that up at this moment in time. But I think what people need to realize, offsite is not. This is again comes back to this terminology when people talk about in my side of not, which is not the modular side, but in the panelized side, people talking about components as if they're offsite. I mean, it's very clear that offsite construction, no matter what type it is, whether it's modular or it's panelized, it comprises of two completely distinct parts that come together to make it work as a product. One is the intangible, which you cannot see, which is all the services, all of the work, all of the process improvement that takes place before anything ever enters a factory. That's the part that the builders can't trap in their minds, because at the moment, in all of their costs, they've built into their total cost of building a project a whole load of extraneous costs that are as a result of the fact that the current process they're using is inefficient. What offsite construction does is it takes those and it doesn't eliminate them. It eliminates as many as it can, but it makes it a far more streamlined process. Now, I admit that the first time a builder, and this is, I think, an important point to make as well, the first time that a builder looks at an offsite delivered project versus traditional stick framed or whatever other methodology that he's actually using, it's hard for him because he has no frame of reference. He just knows what he knows, and you're coming along and you're telling him this is what you're going to do, and this is where he's going to see his cost benefits. He doesn't know whether to believe them or not. So it's a risk and a gamble to go. But the proof is that whenever we've been able to get anybody over that line, they come back to us the next time and the next time and the next time, because then they actually see it. But many times if they looked at the physical product, they would say the physical product's actually more expensive. And this is where it takes a sophisticated buyer and a sophisticated customer to understand. I can't just simply be looking at the hard product, because building a building of any type, whether regardless of its residential or commercial or hospitality, is a process. And that's where money gets lost in the whole equation, the process, and the amount of time people waste trying to figure out how to solve problems after the fact. Well, offsite is about solving the problem before the fact.
Right. Well, and that's exactly it. And this is the question that comes to mind with this question for me is, why do builders say offsite is more expensive, or conversely, offsite should be cheaper, or should it be? Why should one be less than the other if the material costs are the same? So
the question should be, Davis, if at the end of the day, the building that you're building, you've made more money out of it by using offsite, was that a good decision? But if you only narrow it down to the simple little thing, let me compare this little portion of the total build process using an offsite solution versus stick framing or whatever other methodology, then you've narrowed it down, because offsite brings its advantages through the totality of the build.
Yeah.
And so to narrow it down to the one little piece is you'll never get the correct answer. And then it's only after you use the system that you actually get to see where the benefits really arrive.
Well, and I think, and I'm going to let some other people, I want them to respond on this, Henry, Greg, Brittany as well, is, out of this conversation today, the idea of this is, how do we help people understand the true costs of offsite? How do they jump in? How do they say, does it make sense, right? Because everybody's looking at it saying, well, I got to retrain my staff. I got to redo my supply chain. Do I have to invest in a factory? There's all these different components that I think in people's minds makes it very hard to migrate to offsite. So, kind of getting back to my other point, in Brittany or Henry, Greg, whoever wants to go next, why is it that builders out there today are feeling that this is more expensive to do this? Why is it? Why don't they understand the full cost? What are we not doing as an industry to help grow this?
Ladies first.
Well, as an owner, it's not asked for enough. And I think that if it were asked for more often and we elevated the desire for well-focused facilities, more sustainable focused facilities, and challenged our builders to think of ways to leverage the opportunities that are out there, including offsite construction, in order to meet some of these goals, there would be a different kind of driver in order to develop different considerations to include in not only the design, but the building approach. And, I think that Jerry mentioned it before, it happens way before you even start thinking about building. I'm a fan of lean construction, and I've really been excited about integrated forms of agreement and bringing in the builder much earlier on into the process while the design is taking place, in order for builders to think through how might they go about doing things more efficiently and impact the design in order to meet those strategic goals for whoever that owner is, depending upon what their goals are. So I think that, yes, there are barriers from a builder's perspective to adopting an approach, but it doesn't mean that there aren't subcontractors out there that are already doing these things, that they can leverage their manufacturers. I mean, there are so many opportunities if you just think about it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, for sure. Jerry, how about you? How do we define the value of offsite construction? Are you ready to go, Henry?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to say, I don't know why we treat offsite any differently to anything else, frankly. We don't. There's no mystery to it. It's not rocket science. You effectively determine what it is that you want from it, the end result, and then you say, well, what's the pros and cons and the value in doing it in a certain way? It's no different to a decision about anything. You provide tangible proof, data, without rhetoric. You provide facts and figures in the round, and then all the stakeholders make an informed decision. And frankly, it doesn't tend to be builders in my experience.
Interesting. Yeah.
So just following up on that's a great point, because I think from a builder standpoint, especially in this day and age where housing affordability is our number one concern, we have to be able to produce products that the end consumer can buy, our home buyers. So when you start contemplating delivery costs and what the labor differentials are, and you start cranking that out from what you're trained to believe from the beginning, it's very hard to look at the energy efficiency benefits, for example, and weigh those. Remember, and it's so important that we all look at this, when we've determined in this country that for an extra $1,000 that gets added to a purchase price, we're really looking at 154,000 families that no longer can afford a home. And that's nationally, it's around the country, but think about how important that is. So if you have builders or the end buyer trying to consider something that's going to be a few $1,000 swing, what we have to do is boil it back and show how it makes perfect sense for all of these additional reasons.
Yeah, for sure. Jerry?
Well, yeah, I mean, I still come back to we're still having the conversation here talking about the physical elements of the building and I'll put it in simple terms. Every day on site costs a builder money. Now, that's going to vary from place to place, location to location, and type of building to type of building, but it costs money to be on site. And really the question that and this is the one where it comes down to take Greg's point, is most of the builders that we have discussions with can't actually tell us that number off the top of their head. So they go into these projects and they're willing to nickel and dime to try to get the cheapest widget they can on the site. But they don't worry, well, it's not they don't worry, but it seems that they don't worry too much about the fact that they end up using a process that's so inefficient that, maybe it'll take 10 days, maybe it'll take 15 days, maybe it'll take 20 days, or maybe it'll take a month. But that sort of gets ignored in the overall cost. But that's real cost, that the real money that is costing them on that building site. And so the first thing that they really have to do is admit and come to themselves and say, what is it? What is that cost? And what is that day on site costing us? And then from that, I think that's probably the easiest argument. Once you know what the cost on site is, and then you can say with offsite construction, I can shorten the cycle time by X number of days, weeks, or months. Then it becomes a very easy calculation. But you will have situations, and I put it up on LinkedIn, and please feel free to look at it. We completed 272,000 square feet of apartments just in the recent months, and we did it in 13 weeks. 13 weeks. We were not cheaper than conventional stick framing. In fact, we were slightly more expensive. So if you take your traditional procurement methods, you would have said, I'm not using Integra because it's too expensive.
Yep.
However, the developer sat down with us, did his calculation and said, if you can bring this in 13 weeks, that's worth $600,000 to me. Right? So that's the kind of conversation we have to have. So it's a bit of a stupid conversation in one way to be saying, I want the benefit of all this modern technology that it can improve the process, but I don't want to give you any value for it, and I don't even want to acknowledge that there's value in it. The reality is that time is money, and we all know that from being kids. That's a real figure. That's real data. $600,000 that developer has saved by using an offsite solution. But our system was not cheaper on a face-to-face first time look at it.
All right, so this is great because our next question we're going to get to after some comments here is perceived cost versus actual cost. We're going to get into this next, but I think first we're going to get to some questions. Hey, Joel Hutchins is in the crowd. What's happening, Joel? When it comes to cost, how do you, if at all, calculate the added cost associated to the time required at the front end ECI design and education? Brittany, you know what? You started going down that path in your conversation, so why don't you take first stab at that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mentioned lean before, and I think the approach that I've been understanding by talking with plenty of people who do integrated delivery models regularly is that they expect a consultancy fee. They expect to pay pre-construction cost early on in the project so that they can realize those valuable pieces on the back end. So they'll consider like a flat rate in order to engage people to really bring their knowledge and their skill set to the beginning parts of the project. Now, education is a general conditions thing, right? Like how do you bring in training to make sure your employees are up to speed on the technology and the methods? And I think that's something that the industry at large has a problem with. Research and development is not well funded. We are not making enough on our margins to invest in training and education. So I think we have to think a little bit outside of the traditional methods and think about how we might do it differently, whether it be in trade schooling, different kind of webinars, things like that, just kind of go off the beaten path in order to do that kind of training. But it's a really interesting question to think through. I would expect to hire consultants, though, at the beginning of the project to speak to specific skill sets, people that already know how to do this.
All right. Henry, this is, to me, I think a prime question for you because you spend a lot of time consulting and educating manufacturers that are making the switch. I'd love to get your insight on this.
Well, I suppose if it's Joel's question, I suppose the real answer is we get Revea to digitize his product beautifully and feed it into the overall Revit model from day one. And I can't fault that, frankly. There's a sort of a short-term and a long-term answer. At the moment, you just, in the art of the possible now, what you do is you treat the project, you treat the client as a program of works ideally. So obviously the more projects you have, more commonality you can find, the more value you can find. Treat buildings and offsite products as things that are full of stuff. Identify how much stuff you've got and deal with it accordingly. And try not to reinvent the wheel and try not to get a generic design team, management team involved.
Love it. Perfect. All right, next question. All right, Alistair Sawyer. How are you, Alistair? Thank you for joining us today. Clients have different perspectives of what cost perspective is and what it means to them compared to the manufacturers or providers of offsite providers' perspectives. The two perspectives brings a conclusion that equals what is the benefit versus risk. Both parties value cost against the benefit and risk. Anybody want to comment on Alistair? Henry, go ahead.
Yeah, it comes down to the value proposition. You know, you put together all the options and based upon evidence, and you put it in front of your client, and that will include a risk profile, and they will weigh up the pros and cons of doing something and make an informed decision. It's really quite simple. And sometimes that informed decision is not an offsite solution. Sometimes it's a mixture of the two.
Yeah, well, I would actually go as far as to say, when you talk about risk, I mean, think about it. Where does the risk lie when you're sitting talking to an offsite company that is using 3D modeling, figuring out, spending hours, weeks, months in advance to try to work out the problems before they ever go to site, versus actually going onto a building site and trying to construct something off a 2D set of drawings? I mean, if you'd never built before, where would you think the risk would lie? The risk, there's far more risk in going onto site to try to do something in what's the so-called traditional method than there is actually using any offsite solution. Yeah, that doesn't mean the offsite solution is going to be perfect every time, but actually the risk associated with many cases of taking these buildings and building them with very limited information to start with, a very limited research that has gone in before you actually hit the building site. That's where the risk lies, and that's why it's taking now. What in the last year, it's not wider, but just put that in context. In the last year, the number of cycle time days has increased, I think, from 100, it's gone up, I think, by about 27 days. I think that maybe Greg knows off the top of his head, but it has gone up dramatically over the last year to complete a single family home. Well, if you're using offsite construction, you can actually save that 27 days and possibly more. What's the value of that? And where's the risk? Because remember, in most cases, what's actually happening is the offsite companies are using the equivalent materials, if not higher quality materials, than are being used on the building site. They still have engineers involved. They still have architects involved. They're using advanced modeling. They're using precision equipment to make the. When people say that it's value versus the risk, where's the risk? The risk is choosing the right offsite company.
Right.
That's the risk.
Yeah.
It's not offsite per se. Offsite per se as itself is actually de-risking the project.
Well, the transparency of the process provides you with information to determine the risk and identify the risk. That's what it is. It's usual stuff.
Yeah.
But it's more Henry, when people talk about people talk about offsite as being some form of risk. I mean, the logic would say, when you look at it, the risk is to the other side.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think just as something as simple as, if you're doing offsite, you're in a controlled environment working offsite. You reduce the amount of safety concerns as a result, because you have people working in a safe environment. You reduce the amount of travel that you have to go back and forth. That's less time on the road. That's less emissions, right? If you care about sustainability, that's something that's of value to you. And then the amount of material waste, you reduce that considerably because you don't produce it.
Exactly.
So I mean, to again, like, the points that have been made are really simple, but it's very quantifiable now. To your point about transparency, you're not overbuying materials. You're not traveling extra. You're reducing the waste because you've defined through the design exactly what you're going to be building.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, Jerry. Jerry. A lot of it, I mean, even if you have qualitative, subjective key drivers for your client, just use research methodology and convert them into quantitative data, and you can manage those things accordingly.
So let's look at it though realistically from the builder standpoint for a minute. And I think we raised the concern that it's not always the builder that's going to be able to make the best, most knowledgeable decision, perhaps, because when you look at this, one risk is that you nail the plans down substantially enough so that you don't have to pay for additional changes in the factory. Okay, so that's a big piece when you're dealing with a buyer. Remember, we got to get this thing pulled down from theoretical to actually be able to sell it, to explain it. And so what happens at the end of the day, I draw an analogy between the same kind of challenge we have when we recruit the trades. We now have to convince people that it's good to work with your hands again, that you don't necessarily need a straight 4-year education in whatever discipline you're going to choose. Let's get people on the job site, starting their own businesses, going in with a lot less debt and saying, well, the same thing happens here with Offsite. A big piece of it is understand what the perceived risk is, what the perceived challenges are.
Just a point that came to mind there. It was a conversation I had with a national home builder just before Christmas, and we were actually getting our third development with them. And he was honest enough, and he told me, and he said, I have actually given $60,000 of benefit when I analyzed your cost versus stick framing. I said, why was that? And he said, damage to concrete curbs on the site. He said, we have discovered, because remember they'd done multiple projects, they discovered that because of the fact that we bring a crane in and set it in one position and crane everything into place, you don't have a forklift driving all over the curbs. He said it's costing them $60,000 on average to fix the concrete on their site after the stick framers are finished because of the damage that the forklifts cause. And so again, when that's about process. It's looking at what does Offsite do to the overall process. And that's what I mean. You can't just simply look and say, here's the cost of X versus the cost of Y, and not look at the overall process and all the impacts that it actually has on them. And I could give you litany of those one after another, where they are the added benefits that come. Another point I'm making is in terms of the buyer themselves. Think about this. In many cases, a home builder allows a buyer to make the decision as to whether or not they're going to use an Offsite solution or continue on with a stick framer. Where else in any business does a buyer make it an operational decision? Because remember, the switch from stick framing to Offsite is an operational change in that business and the way that it performs. And just like if in my company we were to go out and buy a new piece of equipment or automation that was going to choose the way our operation runs, the buyer wouldn't make that decision. That would be one that would involve me, the CEO, our COO, our technical people, and everybody else to make the decision as to how everything impacts on what we're currently doing. But what you find now at the moment is you have a buyer sitting in an office, and most of these people have never spent a day working on a building site, making an operational decision. You talk about a purchase decision, it's an operational decision, and yet they don't include the people in the decision making that are actually impacted by the operation, who can feed them back the information as to how this could benefit them.
So Jerry, you bring up a good point earlier in the conversation, and I want to move this along into, well, there's two things I should say. One is this conversation, I want everybody out there to be able to say, hey, you want to know the value? Watch this video. Here's a real conversation of what is happening. We're having the discussions, right? This is where it all begins. But we need to define a couple of things. Earlier, you brought up a point, about Offsite and the process. How are components different than Offsite construction? When are they the same? When are they different? For example, trusses built Offsite. Is that a component or is that an Offsite system?
It's a component. And it's a bit like saying to me, tell me that is a wheel a car? Is an engine a car? I mean, is an exhaust a car? No, it's not. It's a part of a car. And the same way as somebody buying wall panels or roof trusses or anything else that's in bit pieces, bringing to it, that's not Offsite construction. It's the very antithesis of Offsite construction, because Offsite construction is about a systematic approach to how you get that building built as efficiently, safely, and sustainably as possible. And so the idea that people are going around with this misnomer in their heads, think, because the amount of times I've heard this, I've used wall panels. My answer back to that is, so what? What exactly has that got to do with Offsite construction? Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Because, as I keep using this quote that Aristotle said, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. How can we understand that in every other single industry, but somehow in construction that has got lost?
So Dave, if I could just bring up, that's what we wrestle with as builders all day long. Jerry, here's the issue. What is it? Somebody tell me, because I have people that'll defend panelization as being part of the offsite family, and maybe rightfully so. But at the end of the day, it has to be a unified discussion. People have to come together and bridge these gaps, because this separation before you even get to the plate doesn't make any sense. You've got to get a unified at bat in there, and you've got to be able to address it as a team and figure out what it is that you want to do. Bring in modular, bring in all these new systems, and there's some tremendous ones out there from all different walks and ways of doing things. That's what builders can understand, and that's what we've all been waiting for and looking for. We need to focus on it now, affordability and so on, and we need to put this together now as a group.
You said it, but you said it there, Greg, yourself. You have all these wonderful systems, and that's the key to it. It has to be a system. I mean, if you're going out and you're bit parsing stuff to try to put a building together, and just because there's a wall panel that's part of an offsite solution, people start thinking, or a roof truss on its own, that's where it falls apart. People are getting confused, and then then they get sold a dream that, oh, I'm using panels, therefore I should see the benefits of offsite construction. Just take it from me. I'm 30 years doing this. My family's 50 years doing this. You won't. Yeah. It's the system that delivers the benefit, because it is the whole greater than the sum of the parts. The parts themselves don't deliver the benefit.
Love it. So, Henry, I'm going to direct this to you then. Is language an issue for us? Example, offsite versus offsite with a hyphen, MMC, et cetera, IC. You know, it seems like we're all calling everything something different because we don't have any true definitions of what our industry really is and what categories people fall into. What's your thoughts on that, Henry?
The answer is yes, Dave. Next question.
Come on, give me something like that.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, like any complex task, you have to break it down into manageable chunks, and you also have to define the terminology of those chunks. So the US strangely behind on this, and you use different terminology in the same way that you use words like sidewalk and dumpster and things like that. But that's okay. And but you've got to get a handle on that, and someone needs to do it. The UK did it quite well with the MCHLG categories, led a lot by Mark Farmer, and Sterling work there. I think there's room for improvement on it. Singapore with the PPVC system is very, very well defined. There's some huge plagiarism just sitting there ready to be improved. And it just needs someone like you, Dave, to come along and make it happen.
Well, we're doing that. We're going to continue this conversation because I 100% agree with you. We're confused. I mean, super confused. It's like you put us all in a bag, shook us up, and threw us on the table, and we're so dizzy we don't know which way is north, south, east, and west sometimes in this conversation. So
yeah, it's like I've got a black bag, and I have to. It's full of tools in it, and I have a T16 Torx that I need to undo on a door over there. I could rummage around in there, pull out a Phillips screwdriver or a wrench, as the Americans like to call them. You've just got to define the tool kit that you have in order to progress this. And it's just, again, any other task or process, you would just apply basic methodology and define your terms, and it needs sorting out.
Yeah.
But to take a point of Brittany's earlier on, Brittany used the term a lot when she was talking about things being integrated. That again is another distinguishing factor about offsite construction versus all of these other elements. Things need to be integrated because that's, again, it's that integration that's bringing the value, and even down to, I mean, and that's true. I mean, modular is a system. I mean, everything's integrated in that. When you're bringing that out there, you've had to go through that whole building to figure out how does it work. The same thing is true of what we do. When I would just, this here, I'll use another term, European offsite type panelization. We get involved with the concrete subs, we get involved with the electrician, we get involved with the plumber, we get involved with the HVAC. Yeah, we don't supply any of those. Why are we getting involved with them? Because we want to make their job easier. Because our job as an offsite company is to make the building process more efficient. Component guys don't do that. There's a major distinction there. They just want to sell by the fact of the definition of the name component. They're focused on the component. We're focusing on a solution for the builder, which is we stand in the same pair of shoes that the builder's standing in, looking back at that building, saying, how do we make that whole thing more efficient? And that's regardless of whether or not we're supplying the items or somebody else is touching off or is connected to what we supplied. But we realize that that's what it's about. It's about making the whole process more efficient.
Yeah.
Panels don't do that.
If I may add one small piece here, I studied architectural engineering. Most people don't know what that means, but it's specific to, just like Jerry described, the integration of design of all engineering and architectural elements. Now, I entered into this industry thinking that most people thought about design from an integrated perspective, but I was unhappily entering into this industry, finding that most people thought about design as far as components. And similarly, when you think about it from a builder's perspective, it's even more disjointed because what we have now is trades, and which makes sense. This is what we did hundreds, thousands of years ago. We had people who had specific expertise on building with particular materials in a particular way, and we rely on that. But there is a need to think about collaboration. And I think everybody said it at some point during this conversation that we need to have these conversations, right? Greg mentioned it really poignantly. We need to have these conversations about what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How do we make sure we do it together and think about how we might maximize those efficiencies?
100%. I mean, we're going to go to questions right after this, but Brittany, I couldn't agree with you more and the rest of the panel, because look at it right now. We have Brittany on, who has a digital background, construction management background. We got Jerry, who comes from a system panelization process. And we have Henry, who is from the volumetric modular world. And we're having an intelligent conversation. And it's funny, the synergies, how many people are agreeing with each other. There's a lot of synergies. And Greg, you said it exactly right. We need to come together. This industry is very fragmented. We're fragmented from panelization, concrete, volumetric, modular, whatever you want to call it. We need to move together forward so we can collectively put out the right information so the builders that are out there can make decisions pertinent to them. So we're going to get to some questions, Greg, and Brittany and Jerry and Henry. And when we come back, Greg, we're going to ask you first, Greg. You're going to be up. What is the most significant problem U.S. builders face today? So Greg, when we get back, we'll come back to you. All right, first question. Rick Hawkins. Hey, Rick. Builders need to change the mindset and view of the offsite process as a value supplier for easier onsite completion, potentially with reduced trades onsite. All right, more of a comment. Thanks, Rick. Question from Saul D. Humphrey. Hey, Saul, thanks for joining us. Could 3D printed homes be the real answer that we are seeking? One could argue that offsite MMC means extra moving of components and assembling some elements twice. See, and then he put I don't know what the link is there, but that's a good question. Who wants to tackle that one first?
I can jump in. Yeah.
Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, 3D. When you've built the basic structure of a house, congratulations, you've got about 85% left of the house to build. There's some interesting stuff. Giulietta Moroni is doing some cool stuff with 3D printing. I personally, I think it's a way away. It's clunky. It's an odd thing. It's not very well suited for certainly anything over a story or two. I think the future in 3D printing is in producing component assemblies and introducing those. That's my prediction.
Yeah.
I like the technology, but I mean, I think I'll be long time retired, and probably my kids will be a long time retired before it actually makes a significant inroad. And also think about it this way. Think about how hard it is to get US builders to switch from stick framing to offset wood framing, to try to get them to switch to.
That's what I was just going to say. Jerry, I think you hit it. I mean, it's a process. Talk about a process.
Yeah,
but yes, I mean, it's not one that we can ignore, though. Let's not, kick it to the curb, because somebody out there is going to jump on it and use it for everything it's worth. We all recognize that, but for the purposes of this conversation, trying to take it to the next level, a little beyond what we're trying to do, at least at the introductory level.
Yeah, and I think there'll be pushback in a lot of markets because of if they're using cementitious-based products that have a lot of CO2. I mean, especially in Europe, there could be a lot of issues with regard to the embodied energy content. I know they're working a lot on polymers now to try to reduce that, but I think I actually, believe it or not, I think it's probably more suitable in third world applications at the moment, where you need a lot of small single-story buildings and you can move that equipment around easily. That's not to say that we can ignore it, but I think there's a long road ahead.
I think that's where the main traction is. Certainly Juliet is doing that there. There's big traction there. Again, at the end of the day, I'm a reasonable person. I will revise my position subject to evidence. Yeah. And if the pros and cons are there, then you choose the right solution.
Yeah,
but even the Guardian piece, however, that Guardian piece keeps getting put out. People should take a look at the photographs in that Guardian piece now. That now is a bit of a wordsmithing and smoke and mirrors going on in that Guardian piece, because that building really only had the first floor of it done in 3D printing, and then it was wood frame off the top of it, including the floor. So, it was sort of trying to portray something that was further on than it actually was.
Yeah, great. So, next question, Jen. Comment. All right, Jerry McCahey, love your point that offsite construction is a system and not a single component. Dave Cooper, please create the official offsite dictionary so we can all be on the same page on what the terms mean and whatnot. Well, Etienne, you're going to be in luck, because we're going to be working on all that stuff, because you're right. We need to know who we are as an industry. And I think that's something that we're taking a hard look at. And that's why we're having these conversations. Thank you for that. All right, Build Small. Hey, that is Mark Casistas Willie, or the Bare Naked Willie himself from BS Friday Show. The system and the process is distinctive. Do not get caught up in the component or an idea. Inclusive process. Those who make language an issue can embrace a wider view. Dive deeper and learn. Yeah. From YouTube, nonetheless. Thanks. Appreciate that, Mark. Almost threw me with the logo and the name on that one.
Yeah, right.
Right? He's all over the place, that guy. Huh?
I like it. I like it. Give him a thumbs up.
All right, we lost Henry. Let me see if I can bring him back in. All right. When Henry pops back up below, we'll bring him back in. All right, here we go. Do we have another question or comment, Jen? Sorry? All right. How can offsite construction still take advantage of performance path code compliance? How can offsite construction still take advantage of performance path code compliance? Here's Henry. All right, Henry, you back with us?
Apologies for that. Someone mentioned the Guardian and my internet cut out. So,
all right, Gary. How can offsite construction still take advantage of performance path code compliance?
Well, I'm a bit confused with the question, but what I will say is, as the discussion we were having on Friday, is that, I mean, if you're talking about improving the code, say with regard to, I'll just take one of them, energy efficiency. Yeah, offsite is the way forward, because that's where you can ensure the quality and the tightness of the building to make sure you get better energy efficiency, remove more cold bridging, blah, blah, blah. In terms of codes themselves in general, I mean, this is a question I think I spoke to you before, Dave, but we've been asked this question many times saying, oh, how are you going to deal with in the US with all these different codes that are around and the way they change? Remember, if you work even in the UK and Ireland, you've got a different building code in Scotland. You've got a different building code in the north of Ireland. You've got a different building code in the Republic of Ireland. You've got a different building code in England and Wales. And then we were shipping houses as far away as Japan, and we did houses in France, Germany, and Italy. I mean, handling codes and changes in them is just part of, if that's a problem for you and you can't think your way around it, you shouldn't be in the business, because that's just simply part of doing business. You have to manage the code changes, and you make sure you have the correct people employed to do it, and you make sure you have the correct process in place to monitor and look after and ensure that you're actually complying with the codes. So I don't see that code change are there. That's just a part of life.
And in most cases, you're going to be going above and beyond what the code is asking for.
That is correct. Very good point. Very good point, Brittany. That point I made in a post as well that said when people talk about, and I love this one where you get builders, because we fully shear buildings and we do all use premium lumber. Builders say, well, we're code compliant. What does that actually mean? It means you've built to the lowest permissible legal standard. And as if that's a badge of honor, the lowest permissible legal standard. You wouldn't get in a car or a plane that was built to that standard.
Perfect. Love it. So if we get anything out of this, we're going to go to the next question. We're already in an hour on this. Is at the summary of all of this, I definitely want to drive home what should be the next topic of conversation you as the listener would like to hear from this panel. What do we need to do to get the correct information, the correct data out there so builders all around the world, developers, wherever you are, can make a really informed decision on why offsite construction, modern methods of construction, whatever we want to call it, is the better way forward? Is there true value in it? We're going to start talking about that more next one. But Hal, Greg, you're up. You ready? What right now is the most significant problem U.S. builders face? Greg Ugaldi, immediate past chairman of the National Association of Home Builders. This is something that you probably know all too well.
It is. And I would say that it's put under the blanket of housing affordability, right? You hear me talk about that all the time. That was my mantra as chairman for the country, and it still is carried forward. Now, so what do we mean by that? Well, you heard the stat. 4,000 families get removed. Here's another one for you. In this day and age, 25% of a purchase price in this country is due to regulatory compliance. Okay, so conforming with all your building process, your application fees, but a portion of that, just straight codes, what we're talking about, trying to meet the codes and building above the codes, that's 6% of that, of a purchase price, directly to that, not materials, labor, and everything else that goes into meeting it, but just the extras. Okay, so now, when we look at what it means for housing affordability, we break it down to 3 simple L's going forward. So you got the labor component, and look how nicely these fall in to a successful offsite building system solution. Okay, so labor in training a workforce, in bringing it to an affordable level. Lumber and materials. Are there economies of scale with buying under one roof, for example? I'm killing a lot of birds with one stone here, Dave, but I know the hour is getting late. So lumber and material costs, and then, of course, lands and the permitting. And what Jerry referred to is bringing everything in and getting that cost under control for development as well as the building side. So land, we need it desperately, and units to build on, lots to build on.
Great. I love it. So, Henry, I'm going to go to you next on this. Coming from an outside perspective from France, but you're working with people here in the United States. What do you feel is the most significant problem the U.S. builders are facing right now? Whoop. Can't hear. Oh, I think you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, apologies for that. That was technology. I suppose the problem is there's no one source you can go to determine what you're going to get in the US. If I want to buy a new computer, I know I'm going to buy a notebook, an iPad, a PC, or a laptop. So I know what the classifications are. I can go online and I can check out the stats and the reviews and all sorts of things. There's no database for that in the US. And obviously that's predicated upon the fact that every company is working for themselves for a competitive advantage as well. But in order to genuinely change the industry, you need to have a database in the US so that people can go to it, and like a TripAdvisor assessment or something like that, to say, these guys are great, these guys are not so great, this system does this system does that. That's where you need to be. It's the lack of joined up information. That's what I was suggesting.
Great, perfect. Brittany, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a little slightly different world. I've primarily done commercial work, and I've worked in big cities. So I would say one thing that I see is a big challenge for offsite construction is convincing major unions to adopt thinking in a holistic perspective. And I think that we have to be almost sensitive to that to some degree, because if we're thinking about offsite, we need to think about how we're utilizing labor in order to get them acquainted with upskilling and reskilling in order to adopt this method. So I think that there is an educational hurdle that we really have to go through in order to think about how to bring our trades on the continuum of what is the future, is here in offsite construction.
Yeah. Jerry.
I mean, just sorry, Jerry, jump in. I mean, the siloed nature of the construction industry is utterly at odds to the technological advances that are happening. I saw an advert for a modular company on LinkedIn asking for a senior quantity surveyor the other day, and I just thought, what on earth is going on? You know, you've got a whole industry that says you're a site engineer, you're a site manager, you're a quantity surveyor, you're a buyer, you're a planner, you're a manager, you do the contracts, and you've got all these, you have a team of so many people, and they're all doing their own thing, and the actual risk and transparency is predicated upon the way those people interact. Yet you've now got fully integrated BIM models that have 100, 500 data sets in them, all overlapping and intertwining, that you can get as much information that you need at the touch of a button. And unless we address this little elephant in the room, this is a big problem.
This is why we're on Twitch, Henry, because the younger generation is using these data sets every day in virtual reality, and they are designing and building as good as Hollywood does movies. It's impressive. It can be done. And Jerry, I see you smiling, so I'm going to shut up. I got something to say. I got it.
Henry and bringing her up 100% right. I mean, it's should they say that the construction industry is the least. Think about it. The largest sector of the U.S. economy is the U.S. construction industry, and it's the least digitized sector of the U.S. economy. I mean, that should frighten anybody in the construction industry that that's the way things are. So, but you also go back to what Henry said. This has also been highlighted multiple times now in the last 24 to 36 months by McKinsey, basically saying that the industry needs to take advantage of the technology that's absolutely out there. And you're right. I mean, every single thing we do is work through a 3D model. So we know every single nail, screw, stud, sheet of plywood, OSB. I can tell you how much, even though we don't do it, I can actually set our computer and tell you how much paint is required to put into that house. I mean, the idea that we're still going back and having guys sitting down there in these silos, as Henry said it, to try to calculate these things, it's absolutely nonsensical. I mean, it really is in the 21st century. But the biggest problem, it could, just to answer that one, so you talk about, it's obviously, to my perspective, it's labor. But where I want to bring this back to is, and this is the real elephant in the room, and again, I think one that the construction industry has to face up to here is U.S. construction productivity over the last 60 years, according to McKinsey, has been negative. So when you talk about housing affordability, how can you try to bring affordability into a system where they actually have negative productivity? When you then take agriculture, and in the same 60-year period, it has gone up 1,700%. When you look at manufacturing, it has gone up 1,400%. I mean, and McKinsey themselves says construction needs to switch to a more manufacturing style environment, and that there's 10x times potential available to them. I mean, these are the things that are sitting there as 800-pound gorillas that people are just, how they can't see them, beyond me.
Well, that's gonna lead us into our next conversation. I agree with all of you. We are in last place when it comes to innovation and technology and moving this forward. And you bring up the McKinsey report. Everybody brings up the McKinsey report. We need to talk about how we're going to do this. The McKinsey and all the reports talk about the issues and the problems, right? But as an industry, again, how do we give people the knowledge, the information to make the educated decision to drive this industry forward? That's what, in my opinion, we need to be striving for, to include, like what Etienne was saying about our names and defining. We need to define some basic things to get to the bigger things. And I think we're heading that way. But
Dave, just to make a plug in for Henry's report, so his organization have also come out with a report as well, recently on construction efficiency as well. So I don't know, Henry, if you want to say something about that, but there's another.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hijack it, obviously, but we did a.
Sorry, I've done that.
Yeah.
Go ahead and hijack us, Henry. We got 2 more questions. So
sure.
But no, let's why don't we, because you did a very well written report, and you're absolutely right, Jerry.
I only do well written reports, Dave. That's all I do.
You're a very good writer. This is why I don't write. I do video because I am horrible at it, and everybody knows that. So don't send me any long messages.
You've got Jen. She's okay.
Yes, I am very lucky with that for sure. All right. So let's move this on. We're going to come to your report, because I think everybody needs to know about that report. And I also think that everybody needs to have the links, which we'll share on that report. So let's get to our next question, and let's come back and end with that conversation, Henry, because I think people are going to find it very, very interesting. Some of the data sets that you guys talked about. All right. So we kind of started talking about this already and alluding to it. What is preventing further adoption of offsite construction? What? Just, I don't care. Anybody, tell me.
I'm going to be talking shortly, so I'm going to keep short.
There's not.
People don't like to hear it, but I'll tell you. I can tell you right now. So it's pretty simple from a traditional building model. It's one of the things that's happened is that every time we look to the offsite industry to lead us into the future, we kind of stumble along and we aren't able to live up to the promises that the industry makes. So it's an overpromise, under-delivery concept. Back them off. You got these traditional building methods that everybody knows and protects and feels comfortable with. Those have to be overcome. Delivery concerns, especially in our country, in the United States, what does that add to the process? And is it even doable in a lot of areas? You need to get favorable zoning and permitting in place so that you can take care of everything that you need to do on site. I mentioned it earlier, you need to have a customization ability. I'm not talking about total customization, although many modular companies do that. And we could talk about that system, but that's a perception out there that, boy, all that costs extra. That's why it's so expensive. Yeah. Not true. And we need to do that. And then we talked about it too. We need to unify the message and all come together to be able to tell people what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, Greg. All right, so let's go. Brittany, why don't you do the follow-up? What do you think is preventing the further adoption of offsite construction? Or if you want to play off what Greg said, whatever you feel.
Yeah, as an educated owner's rep, someone who has been really up on the trends for the past 7 years, offsite it's not new to the discussion. I think, though, perhaps as someone who is still up on the trends, I don't see very many people, very many companies specifically targeting the conversation that we've had today about this value that you're going to get by doing offsite, specifically for owners who can ask for it and put the investment into it. I think that there was a comment earlier, I don't remember who mentioned it, but they said it seems like we're preaching to the choir. And I find we tend to have these conversations amongst ourselves because we know that this is the right way to go. We see the value in it, but are we expressing the value to the people who could actually do something about it? And if owners aren't asking for it, just like BIM has been a similar conversation over the years. Like, well, why should we ask for that? What's the value in that? You need to educate owners. You need to find who your customer is, who's going to strategically position you in a really great place whenever you're pursuing these kind of projects. It's all about developing relationships. It's all about figuring out how to partner and integrate ideas early on prior to the project even starting. And then when it goes, continue that collaboration. I mean, to me, that's how I see it.
I agree. I'm tired of preaching to the choir. Like I said at the beginning of the show, that's something that we do really well in our industry, and that's why we're reaching outside the industry and collaborating with people like you, Brittany. So thank you, because this is what it's going to take. It's going to take us having a larger conversation, have more people enjoy the conversation, join the conversation. And I always say it to everybody. I look at it like the pharmaceutical industry. We need the consumer to be asking for the product. How do we do that? You know, we need the consumer to ask for the product, right? Supply and demand, just like the pharmaceutical company. They got a pill to sell. They don't go to the doctor. They go to the consumer and say, hey, ask your doctor for this, right? And they educate. But that's my opinion. All right, moving on. What is preventing further adoption of offsite construction? Go ahead, Mr. Jerry.
I think Greg said it there is there's been a lot of over-promising and underperformance. But again, I think this is related to people not fully defining what offsite construction is. So because I come across this day in and day out with people saying, I've tried offsite construction before, or I've tried panels before. And you have to go through this whole thing of explaining, no, you haven't. And when it was promised them before, it didn't deliver what they were supposed to get because it wasn't, to use that term that Brittany used a lot, integrated. And so that's part of what it is the fact that there's a legacy there of people claiming to be something that they're not. And it's still actually going on today. I'm aware actually of a very large lumber supply company in the United States holding a major conference, and one of the rooms in that conference was all devoted to Integra, with the purpose of telling all of their customers in there that they could do exactly what Integra could do. Now, it's blatantly obvious that they can't, but they're trying to put that out that they can, and yet they never do, they can't do, and they won't do because it's a completely different industry that we're in compared to what they're in. They're in the supply of lumber. We're in the supply of a building system to improve the overall construction of it. So when you have that battle going on as well on the side with people claiming to be something that they're not, but to really honest, I'd be a lot more optimistic in this and say, what is preventing the further adoption of it? I don't think, certainly from my perspective, now we're only one company in one part of the United States, but at the rate of adoption that we're seeing at the moment, I don't think there's anything stopping it. What it's clear to me is, come back to this point that we're talking earlier on, is when you put the product in front of people, and they see what it can do, and they can go physically there, touch, feel it, and talk to the people who've used it, then the sales come. And that's what's happening. That's now what's happening in Northern California. I mean, we literally now have been turning away work because we can't get it through the system that fast enough that people want to do it. So, but that's coming. It took a while. You had to do enough buildings, put them on the ground, and let people talk to each other to say, does this actually work? Do these guys do what they say they're going to do? And it's working, but that's true. That's true of offsite. I think what's impeding is just the fact that there needs to be more companies doing it the right way, and it's a massive opportunity. I think it's a lot. The industry wants it. The industry wants it, and it's to use a quote on that is, I mean, Henry Ford famously said, if it asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So the problem at the moment is that's the way the construction industry looks at things. It's a little incremental. It's not. We need to fundamentally change the way we look at the build process, but they need to see it.
Sure. So, Henry, you want to comment on that, and then we're going to go to questions and comments.
I would say the things are the usual things in any industry. It's a clear value proposition that something's better, that competitive advantage is working for individuals, and people can see that, so they'll try and copy it to make more money. Or it's legislation. The US sorely needs some federal legislation put in place as per the UK and other countries to say thou shalt use for the following reasons.
Yeah, so that's a big conversation right there, and I've had this conversation several times. And you know what I think? I don't think that our government's going to put in those regulations, but what I do think can happen is we can show the government the value of the systems and let the government lead the way. Let them lead the way. Let them show the world that there's better ways of doing it, right? That's my opinion, because I don't think we'll ever make the change like other countries have in this country. But I do think that if we can get enough influence and politicians and people really understanding the value, the VA hospitals, all these different organizations that are building all over the place to adopt off-site construction, then we have a chance, and then we can say, hey, look, it's actually working. It's saving money. On top of that, all the other people that are I
mean, the great thing about it is the larger the program of works, the better the efficiency, the wider your options.
That's right.
If you've got 100 homes, you're never going to do that volumetric. But, government comes along and says, here's 100,000 homes. You can just set the typologies up. You can set everything up. You'll know how much stuff's in the whole program. You can just license it. You can go out and get it made. And it's a completely different proposition.
So one of the things, Dave, that where you're leading to, and what Henry's saying about the legislative piece, if we just look and work, that recently the ICC has approved a standard, an ANSI standard type style for code development and energy efficiency. Okay. So now if you look at what's going to be required in that space, the energy efficiency space, that opens many doors to say, if these requirements need to be met, building systems is the way to get there. That's how we get the legislation in place. It's never going to be United States needs to have all modular homes. That won't work. But to define issues and have the systems that are easily adaptive to creating solutions, that's where we get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's happening in Canada. We can see that with the utilization of BIM, right? I mean, we're proposing to use BIM as part of the permitting review process versus turning it into 2D documents now, right? For permit review. It's using the technology that we want to use to push our legislators along, push our permitting offices along so that they can see it from a different view and then now come to expect it.
Yeah, no, I agree. These are all good comments. All right. So if you're out there, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, and we are coming up. We have a few minutes left in the show. I know you guys are also very busy and probably have places to go, but we want to get to the last question. We're pushing over 100 comments out there. So we're just picking and choosing who we go through today from all the social media platforms. So thank you. And we will go through all the comments and questions. If we missed any, we will get back to you. But let's get to a couple of them here, Jennifer. Who do we have up? Rick Hawkins back. In your opinion, why are the manufactured home HUD producers able to educate and mass produce a product acceptable to the buying public when we struggle with definitions?
I have an answer. We combined with HUD, the Secretary of HUD, Secretary Carson. You remember when we did the showcase on the National Mall, what happened was when they were able to start using financing facilities that allowed for manufactured homes to be able to get HUD financing, that was a huge first step. So the power of HUD and their ability to get any message out there is very difficult for others to match and overcome. That's really where the power of HUD comes from. They have a tremendous database and they can reach everybody.
All right. That was the perfect question for you, Greg. All right, Gary Fleischer, the mod coach in the house. What's happening, Gary? Gary's a big advocate for our industry as well and has been writing for a long time. So I'm glad you joined us today. Another point is just what Dave mentioned. There's no marketing effort in our industry. Yeah, playing off this, right? Cal even has a marketing program. Well, he's Jen, I'm going to comment on that real quick. He's absolutely right. But this is where if we come together as an industry and we work together as an industry and we deliver the same message, the same terminology, the same definition, and yes, I'm beating a dead horse if that's the right terminology to use. That's the only way we're going to drive the message home. That's the only way. Apple doesn't have 10,000 products. They drive their several products home, and you know exactly what they are by the names. We need to do the same as the industry. Going back to Greg's comment, so everybody really understands who we are and what we do, and that we don't fall short on ourselves. All right, next question. That was my soapbox. Should have put it up. Jamie Parr in the house. Hey, Jamie. Not having a common language for MMC offsite, I see globally as part of the problem. You need to stop saying whatever you want to call it and set the common language for the U.S. 100% right. I mean, this is a common thing. You know, Jerry, we've talked about it. You know, Henry, we've talked about it. Greg, we have talked about this. Nobody knows who the hell anybody is. Like, what is it? You know, we got to define the difference between components and truly offsite. You know, is it a system? There's all these different things. We're going to work on that. We're going to change this industry because I know myself and everybody on this panel, we're done being in last place. It's time to go to first place when it comes to an industry and provide healthier, better homes for people, period. And better work environments for all the trades. They're going to love it once they understand it. David Kirk in the house. Hey, David. All right. Intertrade communication is non-existent in construction. Has always been. Yeah, it has been.
That's why we have integrated project delivery now. We can change that.
Yeah.
There is so much wonderful software.
Damn, I love that.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I love that. You're right. That's exactly it. But see, this is where this comes out. You're right, Brittany. 100% right. I love it. All right, Joe Butler, Forward Solutions Group. I got to give a shout out. Joe, thanks for joining us. Joe and Forward Solutions Group is a sponsor of our Wednesday show, and I love it when they join us because they got it going on. Every industry that has been disrupted in the past 50 years was disrupted by the goal of greater affordability and accessibility. We have not settled as an industry on what we are trying to achieve. Well, that's an interesting comment. All right, Steve Leffler. Jerry, did you want to say something on that?
I mean, there's lots. I'm trying not to hog this thing, Dave. So I'm trying to keep my views to myself here, so I could go on for hours on some of these things. I mean, offsite. You're right. I mean, I think the thing about defining what offsite is a very, very important thing. It's a basic first step in the US. I think people need to understand. We need to stop this. Back to Greg's thing, people over-promising and underperforming. The reason why they're doing that is because they're claiming to be something they're not. We need to get back to what it is, and then you can make a true purchase decision at that point in time. But sorry, what was the last point there? Can you put that back up again, Dave?
Yeah, 1 second. So you had to go there, Jerry. Just when I was loving you today.
Oh no, I back out now. I'll hold my.
That's okay. That's all right.
For the.
Is there more comments, Jen? Next comment. Let's keep it going here. We only have a few more minutes. If you guys have to run, just let me know, or we can get through the last question, which I would love to do if you have the time to do it. Are you guys good for one more question after another comment or two?
Yeah.
Perfect. David Kirk, there is a long and well-earned stigma to prefab, and this is considered and sold against as prefab. Yeah, I agree with that. There is a stigma.
Yeah. Anyone calls it prefab goes on the list.
Yeah, that's right. You're in my
David Kirk, you're on the list.
Yeah. No, I don't think he's calling it that, but I think he's saying what is.
No, he's not.
Just be careful. Goes on the list.
Yeah.
Had the privilege of meeting David Kirk several times. He is definitely not calling it that. He's all for our advancement of this industry.
Well, he had a lucky escape.
Tony Woods, very good point, Brittany. Mindset training, interaction with the traditionalists who need to change and embrace the future and use BIM to its maximum. Excellent. All right. Let's see where we're at here. Let's go to the next question. We're going to wrap this up, round it up. Everybody, I know there's a lot of comments. We would love to get to everybody today, but we're really making a difference in our industry right now by getting through all of these things. What's that? All right, here we go. Can we bring the industry together? All of these comments have just come up. I know we've been talking about this. Can we, and I'm going to add a layer to it, how do we? How do we? And I appreciate when you guys say Dave Cooper Live. You know, it always makes me feel good. But this is only one piece of the puzzle.
Dave, I'm going to jump in there one part in this one because I've been saying, I know you and I have discussed this as well. The industry needs an overall representative offsite industry association. And I think that doesn't mean the representative bodies of the existing organizations couldn't or shouldn't be part of it. But I think there needs to be a body that represents the offsite industry, because we currently do not have that. We do have very good organizations that represent modular on their own. We have no industry that represents what we do. None. There's none in the US. There is in Europe. All the countries basically have it, but not here in the US. So I think in terms of getting that message out, we really need to start with the Offsite Industry Association that can get that controlled, correct message out to all of the stakeholders. So that's one of the things that we need to start doing.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for everything you just said, 100%.
So I'll jump in on that because I strongly believe that the industry will come together, and I believe there's a bright future. And using some of the tools that we're talking about today, some of the hurdles, some of the things that are blocking us, preventing us from doing it thus far, and what we need to overcome, people have to be comfortable with the fact that with a proper conversation, they protect themselves. They not only grow the industry and allow their businesses to be protected and grow that way, but you can't fear talking about things that might appear to be competition, for example. We have to do that. We do it in so many ways in our industry, but yet at the same time, if you need to ask a builder or anybody that provides resources to our industry, we're willing to help. We're willing to give competitors the shirt off our back, share plans, share subcontractors and materials, everything. But we really need, for the sake of this industry, is to start having an open mind and sharing with each other so that we can push this along.
All right. I'm going to let the next two go on this, but you're absolutely right, Greg. This is my soapbox big time, because I don't care if you think you have the right solution and the best solution out there and you're holding it close to your hip, then why are we only 3 to 5% of the entire industry? It makes absolutely no sense to me. The collaboration and the sharing is required for us to move forward. Because guess what? If you have the secret sauce, you're not going to have a better secret sauce if you don't have somebody pushing you on your own secret sauce, right? So in my opinion, Greg, that is exactly right. And it is amazing when people reach out to anybody on this panel. It's like open arms. We share everything we have. That's what we need to continue doing. And I think then we're going to see the industry go further faster, for sure. Okay, who wants to go next on this?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I completely agree with the comments about risk and communicating that risk is something that we're reducing by doing this offsite modern method of construction. But I think there's also another perspective that we need to have that Greg touched on already. But it's in relationship to that collaboration, but we need to think a little bit even broader than those who are in this industry. We have plenty of people to learn from. We have people to learn from on the manufacturing side, and we need to really connect with associations that already are established that can speak to and understand construction. Perhaps we teach them what we're doing. I'm all for creating an offsite professional organization and connecting with every other organization that lives out there right now. I think that's great. But there's also two other groups that we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking a little bit more broadly in the US about diversity. And I say that as a woman of color. I'm very few opportunities to be on the stage. And I think we just need to start thinking about how can we get more diversity of thought. It doesn't just have to be people of color. You just get people with different backgrounds, different mindsets, different ways of thinking, because they're coming to the table with different perspectives. And then we talked about TikTok, right? Actually, yeah, you were talking about Twitch. I was thinking about TikTok, Dave, and I was like, I think you're convincing me that I'm going to be on TikTok starting this week, because we have the Gen Z generation coming up right now. I literally was just in a conversation earlier today with a furniture provider talking about how Gen Z is focused on social causes. They think differently. They're in the gaming environment, and they think about how to build differently. They have an urban planning mindset like no other, simply because of gamification. We got to be thinking about how might we be integrating technology, blockchain, AI, machine learning. When we're thinking about offsite construction, we need to pull all these perspectives together and stop thinking in such a limited way.
You're 100% right. And I'm glad you said everything you said, because diversity, we need more women in our industry. We are going to go further, faster with inclusivity, 100%. You know, it doesn't matter color or race. It just we need more people thinking differently, bringing better ideas to the table. We can't just keep talking amongst ourselves. And you're absolutely right. TikTok. Hey, Jerry's on TikTok. Jerry McCoffey, he's like a star on TikTok already, man.
It's more Juan than me.
Yeah, well, hey, yeah, Juan, the team at Integra is on TikTok. We're on TikTok. It's an amazing place. The bottom line, Brittany, I think you're absolutely right. We have to go where they're at. If we're going to sit around and wait for people outside of our industry just to come to us, because we don't do a good job marketing, we do not do a good job going after them, right? We don't. So we need to go to where they are and bring the power of what we do as an industry, the technology, the innovation. This is like being an airline pilot when that was cool back in the 60s, right? Wasn't it the 60s, 70s? Everyone wanted to be an airline pilot. It was the coolest thing ever. We're at that stage in our industry where change is happening. Now's the time to have some fun with it. Henry, what's your thoughts on that last question? Do you remember what it was? There it is.
I think the answer, the thing that will bring the industry together is nothing philanthropic, unfortunately, or nothing of a it's nothing particularly nice. It'll be competitive advantage and efficiency gains, as it normally is, and legislation, if you can get it, which is great. I mean, I've had this old thing sitting around on the shelves for a couple of years, and that, it's happening. It is happening. The technology that are out there are incredible. We are building the matrix. We no longer have to. We can get so much information in the public realm by scraping, surveys, stuff above, below ground, to inform generative design. And as long as we can digitize the supply chain using, there's some, MATLAB and Joel Hutchins, Revea. I mean, the stuff we're doing, we can effectively, the efficiency is huge. And then we've got a situation where if we're automating as well, the efficiencies are huge. It's not my bag, but, I've been fortunate enough in the last year to be hanging around some really clever people who know a lot about stuff, and that's been putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. The blockchain stuff, the AI. But the elephant in the room is the more rules-based your job is, and you are effectively, we're going to get this guy who's got 30 years experience and knows all this stuff, and he's great at catching everything, catching all the risks, all things. If you're rules-based, AI is going to replace you real fast.
Yeah.
So there's some. But fundamentally, like the way, now a Ford 1.5 litre 3-cylinder turbo boost engine makes 200 horsepower. In 1983, a 5 litre Ford V8 made 177 horsepower, and that was the high output version. So, it's there. We know people who have got, their input or their product to the resale is 25%. And once we start realizing as an industry how we can reduce that gap and the competitive advantage that's in there, then that's the thing that's going to make the huge difference.
Yeah, 100% agree. All right, listen, so we're at the end of the show. Henry, I do think that now's the time to let's talk about the paper that you guys have recently put out.
Time-wise, just have a look at it. Effectively,
I have nothing else to do. Let's go. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, Dave, I have a closing action.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. We're gonna wrap it up, but
just look at it. We've gone out. We've gone out anonymously. That's hugely important to a global supply chain, and we've asked them questions that are: what do you spend on marketing? What do you spend on design? What do you spend on just the basic parameters? And because it's anonymized, they've given us that information, and from there we can say, well, actually, some guys have got 1 in 14 hit rate. Some guys got a 1 in 1.5. Yep. So that's what efficiency means. It's a difference between what they're doing and there. And once we can just get the raw data and quantify it, and Procore did a very similar thing recently, which is very cool to have a look as well. Good to throw that in.
All right. Well, great.
Now, Daddy.
I hope. What's that? I hope you guys had a wonderful time on today's show. I think it was very.
Dave, I have, if we could maybe just go around, I had the 4 things that I really look at this industry that is helping going forward. So, and you can see how we're all on the same page. It's really unbelievable. So I have listed components that'll benefit greatly going forward with a strong offsite program: energy efficiency, diversity, economies of scale, and the conservation of resources. And then at the end of the day, you pull all that together and it's cost savings. That's really where we're headed with this.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else?
I'm
I've said my piece, and I concur.
Yes.
No, Greg, you know what? You're 100% right. And Greg, I think having your insight from where you sit at the NAHB and the willingness that the National Association of Home Builder has to actually talk to us as an industry and learn. It says so much for us as an industry that we're looking to grow. We're looking at different ideas, innovative ways. We need more people in the workforce, right? We need more young people, diversified people, like Brittany said. We need them in the workforce. We need to go out and find them. We need to be more energy efficient. We need to build healthier homes, and we need to build more affordable homes. We say this all the time. Listen, if we were doing it right, we probably wouldn't have, what is it, 1.6 billion home deficit in the world or what have you. If we were doing it right, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in. So listen, everyone, unless there's some final notes, I think.
Well, one point just that maybe Greg could take to the NHS, because what you do here is come back to this discussion about productivity.
Yeah.
So at the moment in the United States, I think most builders will tell you that they have a major problem with labor with regard to framing. So there's a framing labor productivity in the country. I think that's genuinely agreed. Yet our own detailed analysis is that our framing system, or an offsite framing system, not just mean us, but proper offsite framing as we're using it, achieves a 507% increase in efficiency. So that's like improving the workforce by 5 times. So when people go out there and they say there's this bizarre conversation goes on in the US about, we have a labor shortage for framing, and everybody wants to turn to immigration and say, give me more people across the border, and nobody wants to turn around and say, well, how do I actually make the current people that I have more productive?
Right.
Really, that's another argument about offsite construction. We are not alone making the existing people more productive, but we're extending the working life of the experienced people, because we're taking a lot of the heavy lifting and pressure off them. So offsite, from that perspective, one, solves certainly from a framing labor issue, but also think about this, extending the working life of the people who genuinely have the experience in the industry. It's a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. Well, listen, everybody, I thank you so much for your time. I mean, we're at an hour and 45 minutes. That's by far, I think, getting up to the longest show. Mark Bare Naked Willie may disagree with me, but I think we're there. So listen, I hope each and every one of you will come back on the show. I hope the next conversation that we have, we can start diving into the nuts and bolts and the data that builders can expect to see, and how do they see the true savings if they're switching to offsite. These are the conversations we're going to have moving forward. We got to show them the proof, right? I always play, Jerry Maguire, show me the money, because that's what it's all about. We need to show them the money, and if we can show them the money, they're going to make better decisions and understand what we have going on. So that's a wrap, everybody. Please, we'll get to all your comments. I know there's so many of them. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, please follow Brittany, follow her, subscribe to her YouTube channel. Jerry, Henry, and Greg, follow them as well. My name's Dave Cooper. I'll come back to the For You as soon as the outro is over. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.